My own family, the people I trusted most in this world, tried to kill me so that they could claim my veteran pension and insurance benefits. They thought they had succeeded when they dumped what they believed was my lifeless body into a freezing lake. But I survived, and what happened next made them wish they had never laid a finger on me. But let me take you back to how this nightmare began. Don't forget to like this video, drop a comment of where you are watching from, and subscribe to the channel for more revenge stories for elders. My name is Joram, and I am 76 years old. The story I'm about to share is based on my personal experience of a brutal betrayal, along with the confession of my own family members who tried to kill me. I'm telling this story with full knowledge of what they did and how they did it, as detailed in the police report they gave. So let's begin. My full name is Joram Declan, and I spent most of my life serving my country as a soldier before retiring to the quiet town of Via Ridge. My wife Delina and I never had children of our own, but we raised my late brother's 2 kids after he and his wife died in a car accident many years ago. A few years later, I also lost my wife to a terminal illness. After her passing, my niece Lyra, who was 31, and her younger brother Creven, who was 28, told me not to worry, they would take care of me. Lyra and her younger brother Creven, the children of my late brother, were the only family I had left. When they offered to take care of me, I believed they were acting out of love and concern for their aging uncle. I had no idea they were actually preparing me for death while plotting to steal my veteran benefits. It all started on a peaceful night when they brought me my evening tea. While I sat in my favorite armchair, I overheard them arguing in their room. I heard Creven said, "We'll finish him off tonight. Then we can burn the paperwork and collect all the benefits." At first, I didn't understand what he meant. But after a few minutes, they came out and offered to help me to bed. I could sense something was wrong. Immediately, I got on my bed. They both pinned me down on my own bed. Creven held a pillow over my face, while Lyra stood beside him, holding my legs to help him finish the job. She whispered cruel words about how I was an ugly burden, and that my death would solve all their problems. I fought back with everything I had left in my old bones. But they were young and determined, and I knew that if I kept struggling, they would eventually overpower me and complete their evil plan. So I made a choice that would save my life. I stopped fighting and let my body go completely limp. I held my breath and slowed my heartbeat using techniques I had learned during my military training. Years of service had taught me how to detach my mind during moments of extreme crisis and danger. My pulse weakened just enough to fool them in the dim light of my bedroom. Lyra trembled as she checked for signs of life, while Creven paced around the room in a panic. They believed they had successfully killed me and now faced the challenge of disposing of my body. They wrapped me in a blanket like I was nothing more than garbage and shoved me into the trunk of Lyra's car. I remained perfectly still and started breathing normally while they drove through the night. I had no idea where they were taking me, but I later discovered that it was to Willowmere Lake, a remote location with no security cameras. According to their confession statement, which I later read after they were apprehended, they stated that they chose this spot because the deep waters and strong currents would carry a body far away from the dumping site. I vividly remember them lifting what they thought was my corpse from the trunk and throwing me into the freezing water, expecting the lake to hide their crime forever. But I wasn't dead. I stayed completely still as I sank deeper into the water, waiting for them to leave. Thanks to my years of military training, I was able to hold my breath just a little longer until they finally drove off. When I was sure they drove off, I kicked free from the blanket underwater and fought my way to the surface, gasping for air. My lungs burned as I struggled to stay afloat in the dark water. I managed to grab onto a decaying dock beam and held on with the last of my strength. Hours passed before I was discovered by Silas Marrow, a local fisherman who was checking his nets at dawn. He pulled me from the water, and I will be forever grateful for his help. Soaked and shivering, but very much alive, I made a decision that would change everything. I did not report the crime to the authorities immediately, and I did not even tell Silas the full truth about what had happened to me. I needed Lyra and Creven to believe that their evil plan had succeeded perfectly. If they thought they were done with me, they had no idea what I was still capable of accomplishing. Their betrayal had awakened something in me that had been sleeping since my military days. And now that soldier was angry and ready for war. I spent the next several hours hidden in Silas's apartment, planning my next moves carefully. This was where it dawned on me that the argument they were having before they attacked me, the one about finishing me off and preparing the paperwork and to collect all the benefits, was all about my military pension. Lyra and Creven had discovered that my military pension and life insurance policies were worth over $600,000. They realized I was worth more dead than alive to them. So they hatched a plan to murder me and claim my death benefits through fraud. But I was going to let them think they had won before I struck back. What happened next would make them regret ever laying a hand on me. Their betrayal had not just failed to kill me. It had made me stronger and more determined than ever. Keep watching, because their punishment was about to begin. As I sat in Silas's apartment, wrapped in warm blankets by the fire, I could not stop shaking. The trembling was not from the cold water anymore, but from the complete shock of what had just happened to me. These were not strangers who had tried to kill me for money. These were the children I and my late wife had helped raise when their parents died in a tragic car accident many years ago. I was already 60 years old when I opened my doors to them without any hesitation. I gave up my quiet retirement plans to make sure they had food, education, and a stable home. I had paid for Lyra's college education, taking out loans just to cover all her expenses. I supported Creven through his legal training, sacrificing my own comfort to give him opportunities. Every illness they faced, every failure they experienced, every disappointment that broke their hearts, I was there for them. I was not there out of obligation or duty, but because I genuinely loved them like they were my own children. I had taught Creven how to ride a bicycle when he was 12. I stayed up late sewing Lyra's prom dress when she could not afford to buy one from a store. They had cried in my arms more times than I could count over the years. When they had nightmares about their parents' death, I comforted them. When they struggled with schoolwork, I helped them study. When they faced bullies, I stood up for them. And yet, despite all the love and sacrifice I had given them, they looked me in the face and decided I was worth more dead than alive. They had plotted behind my back for weeks, planning my murder. How do you process something like that kind of betrayal? How do you make peace with knowing that the people you raised and trusted completely decided your life was nothing more than a potential payout? I did not cry that night, but something deep inside me broke forever. 2 days later, I told Silas everything that had happened. I told him every detail of how my niece and nephew had tried to kill me, and I believed it was because of my pension check. Silas listened in complete silence, his face growing more serious with each part of my story. When I finished speaking, he asked me a simple question about what I wanted to do about their betrayal. I told him I was going to watch them carefully, let them believe they had succeeded, and when the time was right, I would strike back and take everything from them. Silas did not ask any more questions after that. He simply locked his doors and made me a cup of tea. Before we continue with the story, I just want to take a quick moment to say, if you're still watching and enjoying it, please be kind enough to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Unlike many creators who put out soulless AI stories, the stories I share come from real-life experiences. Creating content like this takes time and effort. So your support in the form of liking the video, leaving a comment about where you're watching from, and subscribing really means a lot. Thank you. Now let's get back to our story. I stayed in Silas' house for a week without contacting anybody. But I knew that being alive was not enough for me. I needed real help to make my plan work perfectly. So I did something that could have been very dangerous. I contacted Staff Sergeant Merrick Dunn, a man I had served with for over 20 years during my military career. In 2006, during a supply run in Afghanistan, an explosive device hit our convoy and flipped my vehicle completely over. I was trapped inside, bleeding heavily and losing consciousness quickly. Flames were rising around me, gunfire was snapping through the air, and our communications were completely dead. I thought it was the end for me when Merrick came charging through the chaos to save my life. Shrapnel tore through his arm, but he dragged me out of that burning vehicle and shielded me with his own body. That was not just bravery. That was true brotherhood. He saved my life that day, and from that moment on, I trusted him like family. So now, when my actual blood relatives had tried to kill me for money, I knew I could trust Merrick to help me get the justice I deserved. I used Silas's phone to call him, and when I said his name, he did not believe it was really me speaking. He kept repeating that he had seen my obituary online a few days ago, and had even lit a candle in my memory. I gave him Silas's address and begged him to come alone to see me. He drove 2 hours through the night to reach us. The second he saw me in the flesh, he froze completely. He asked me what had happened, and I told him everything about the attempted murder. I explained how Lyra and Creven had drugged me, tried to suffocate me, and dumped me in the lake thinking I was dead. His hands shook with anger as he listened. His face grew hard when he understood they had tried to erase me for a pension. Merrick urged me to reveal myself immediately and have them arrested, but I explained my plan to him. I wanted Lyra and Creven to believe they had won completely before I struck back at them. I wanted them to feel secure in their victory before I destroyed them. Without any hesitation, Merrick agreed to help me execute my plan. While I stayed hidden in the attic, he would keep me updated on their activities. He knew who to talk to, what doors to knock on, and what signs to watch for. Week by week, Merrick tracked every move they made and passed the information to me quietly. He used his military connections and investigative skills to gather evidence of their fraud. By the end of the first week, he updated me that Lyra and Creven had already filed my death certificate with the authorities. Merrick added that Lyra and Creven didn't report my alleged death to police immediately. Instead, they claimed I died peacefully in my sleep and hired a shady mortician to declare the death and handle cremation paperwork. And since I had no close friends or immediate family to verify, no one contested it. By the second week, Merrick told me they had held a fake funeral service for me. I was not there to hear whatever lies they told about loving their dear uncle, but I could imagine it was full of crocodile tears and greedy hearts pretending to mourn. Merrick told me the funeral was small, with only a few neighbors and distant acquaintances attending. Lyra wore black and sobbed convincingly, while Creven stood beside her looking appropriately sad. They played their parts perfectly, fooling everyone who came to pay their respects to my memory. But while they were acting like grieving family members, they were already making plans to collect their fraudulent inheritance. Merrick told me they had contacted my insurance company and the Department of Veterans Affairs to begin the claims process for my death benefits. Merrick informed me that the first payouts would take 6 to 10 weeks to be processed and dispersed to them. My plan was to wait until they were ready to collect that first payment before I showed up in their faces, something they would never expect in their worst nightmares. During those long weeks of waiting, I learned more about their deception than I ever wanted to know. Merrick discovered they had been researching my financial situation for months before the murder attempt. They had made copies of my important documents and even consulted with a lawyer about inheritance procedures. They had prepared false identification documents and forged signatures on multiple forms. They had practiced their story about finding me dead in my bed from natural causes. They had even researched the best funeral home to use for the cheapest possible service. What hurt me most was learning that they had been planning this for so long while living in my house and accepting my care. Every meal I provided for them, every conversation we shared, every moment of kindness I showed them was happening while they were plotting my death. I also discovered that they had been going through my personal belongings, looking for valuable items to sell after my death. They had made lists of my furniture, my tools, and even my military medals. Nothing was too sacred for them to turn into cash. Merrick told me they had already contacted a real estate agent about selling my house. They planned to put it on the market immediately after collecting the insurance money. They wanted to liquidate every asset I owned as quickly as possible and disappear with the proceeds. But the most painful discovery was that they had been bad-mouthing me to neighbors and friends, preparing everyone to believe I was a burden they had been caring for out of duty. They told people I was becoming difficult and demanding in my old age. They painted themselves as long-suffering caregivers who had sacrificed their own lives to take care of their ungrateful uncle. They wanted everyone to think they deserved whatever inheritance they would receive from my estate. This helped explain why so few people attended my funeral. 7 weeks had passed when Merrick told me the time had come. The Department of Veterans Affairs had approved their claims, and they had received notification that their first payment was ready for collection. Over $200,000 in death benefits, pension payments, and insurance money. That morning, I got ready for what would be the most important performance of my life. I put on my good shirt and a tie. I combed my hair and looked at myself in the mirror, practicing the expression I would wear when they saw me. I arrived at the Department of Veterans Affairs regional office early and took a seat in the waiting area. I did not alert the staff to my presence or explain why I was there. I simply sat quietly and waited for the doors to open. When they arrived, Lyra stepped in first, dressed like morning royalty in an expensive black dress and designer sunglasses. She looked like she was attending a fashion show rather than collecting death benefits. Creven walked beside her, grinning widely and holding the forged paperwork in his hands. They were actually laughing about something as they entered the building. They were so confident in their success that they could not even pretend to be sad about my death anymore. They had gotten away with murder, and they were about to become rich. But then they saw me sitting there, very much alive, looking directly at them with a calm smile on my face. The moment their eyes met mine, everything changed in that government office. Creven's face went completely white, like all the blood had drained from his body in an instant. He did not say a single word, just spun around and ran out of the building as fast as his legs could carry him. But Lyra's reaction was completely different. She collapsed right there on the floor, shaking uncontrollably and sobbing hysterically. She immediately began begging for forgiveness, claiming it was all Creven's idea and that he had forced her to participate in the murder attempt. I did not move from my chair. I did not speak. I just sat there watching her fall apart, remembering how she had whispered those cruel words while Creven held the pillow over my face. I felt no sympathy for her tears or her desperate pleas for mercy. The Department of Veterans Affairs officials had been expecting this moment. Merrick had contacted them days earlier and explained the entire situation. They had law enforcement officers waiting in the next room, ready to make arrests as soon as Lyra and Creven arrived. The officers moved in quickly and placed handcuffs on Lyra while she was still sobbing on the floor. Outside, other officers were already chasing down Creven, who had made it only 2 blocks before they tackled him to the ground. His attempt to escape had failed completely. The charges filed against both of them were enormous and would likely result in decades in prison. Attempted murder, fraudulent filing of death certificates, identity theft, insurance fraud, pension theft, obstruction of justice, conspiracy to commit financial crimes, and abuse of a vulnerable adult. But it was not until the officers began leading them both toward the police car that Lyra's true feelings finally came out. She jerked away from the officers, tears streaming down her face, and screamed at me with years of buried rage and pain. She accused me of letting their father die when I could have helped him years ago. She claimed I had turned my back on him when he needed me most, and that if I had just helped him, they would still have parents and would not be standing there in handcuffs. Everything in the room went silent as her words hit me. She was not just talking about the crime they had committed against me. She was talking about something much older and deeper, something I thought had been buried and forgotten long ago. For a split second, the government office disappeared, and all I could hear was her voice when she was just a child. The little girl I had once carried on my shoulders was now spitting rage and grief at me while wearing handcuffs and facing a lifetime in prison. Their father, Renaud, had been my younger brother. In the late 1980s, he had come to me asking for help with his dream of opening a small transport business. He needed money for a truck, permits, and startup costs. Nothing too expensive or unreasonable for his plan. But I was trying to manage my own mortgage and other financial responsibilities. I was struggling with my own financial situation and told him I could not help him at that time. He was hurt by my refusal, but he did not argue with me or try to pressure me into changing my mind. Instead, he decided to try other options and took a very risky loan from a questionable lender to buy a used delivery van with faulty brakes. 3 months later, while returning from a delivery job, the van's brakes failed completely. They crashed into a tree, and the vehicle caught fire immediately. Renaud and his wife Tessa were both killed in the accident, leaving behind 2 young children who had no other family. I could not forgive myself for what had happened to them. I took Lyra and Creven into my home and raised them as my own children. I gave them everything I could provide, including education, stability, and love. When they were older, I told them the truth about their parents' death. I thought confessing my role in their tragedy would clear my conscience and help them understand why I had been so devoted to their care. I never imagined that my confession would plant seeds of hatred and resentment that would grow into a murder plot decades later. As I stood there watching them being led away in handcuffs, I finally understood their true motivation. They had not just wanted my money. They thought killing me would balance the scales of justice for their parents' death. They believed I owed them a blood debt, and my death was their twisted idea of justice. They were wrong about seeking revenge, but part of me understood the deep wound I had left behind in their hearts. Not enough to forgive what they had done to me, but enough to know that pain and resentment can turn children into monsters when nobody helps them heal properly. And maybe, just maybe, I had failed them in more ways than I ever knew or wanted to admit to myself. Comment below about what part of this story resonated most with you. Like and subscribe if you want more content like this that can help protect you and your loved ones from similar betrayals. Until next time, keep living with grace and purpose.